So first of all, I am just like, hey, so many people. Wow, y'all have filled up this room. This is amazing. Thank you so much, Regis, for having me here. I have never been to Colorado before, never been to Denver. Got some dope weed I'm going to try to smuggle back. I'm not going to out the person who took me, but she made sure I went to the cannabis superstore, had my selection out there. It's like, cookies, brownies, yes! How do I get this back to Philadelphia? So after this, you know it's going down in my hotel room. So they asked me to come and to speak about, you know, sexuality, feminism, social justice, sexual violence, and things like that. And, you know, these things all kind of overlap in really interesting ways, and so I'd like to take you on a little bit of a journey so you can kind of understand how I've gotten to where I am as an activist in this particular space and what has informed my praxis, and maybe it can inspire you a little bit, particularly those of you who have intentions of going forward and being kind of social justice workers or people who intend to kind of bring this like peace and justice and feminist lens to your work. So I thank you. If you've never heard of me, that's cool. You won't forget me. But if you have heard me speak before, you know that I curse. So if cursing is an issue, I'm going to work on it because I know this is a Jesuit place and I don't have my rosary because I am not Catholic. But I'm going to try to do my best to be as real as possible. I am from New York. We curse. It's like, whatever. All right. So in order to kind of discuss this idea of sexuality, healthy sexuality, and healthy sexual practice, and this idea of a sexual social justice, right? Because that is a thing. We have to kind of consider, you know, the approach. I'm going to come through a feminist lens. We have to go back a bit, and we have to kind of understand what the foundation was like to make this work happen. I'd like to think of myself as a respected voice in this kind of modern feminist movement, and I do what I can to engage in conversations about different things, because there's so many levels to this. It's like I could be a singular thinking person, but because there's so many levels to it, I try to make sure that I'm informed about these things, and I try to inform others. Particularly for people that are new to feminism, right? Feminism is kind of seeing a resurgence in popularity, right? Beyonce, let's just be real, like Beyonce just made it so awesome to just be feminist, right? Because she was like, yes, I'm flawless, bitch, look at me. Feminism in the background, it was just like, yay, it's cool to be a feminist. But one of my concerns is that as people come to feminism, they're kind of consuming it through social media, right? So it's these little tidbits of things, and you hear, you know, you read 140 characters of something that moves you, but then are you moved to kind of go and research and learn a little bit more about how that person came to even say that thing and where they learn it. And while I am so excited that we have a new generation of folks who are very much interested in feminist practice, I absolutely encourage people to do the research, educate yourselves, do the gender studies, the women's studies, the theory. Let's not take for granted the hard work that a lot of people before us, men, women, you know, non-binary, you know, have put into this so that we can be where we are, where we have these 140 character clips, okay? First of all, I want to just kind of open and say that I am a survivor of sexual assault. And I think that that's one of the reasons I kind of got into this work. And not saying that if you haven't experienced it, that you can't talk about it with expertise. But for me, it's personal. And I've had more than one experience with it. Pretty much from the time I was 4 was my first incidence with encountering an act of sexual violation. And it wasn't until I was older that I could kind of look back on it and realize that, 1, it's totally wrong, but 2, it's entirely too common. And as I would talk to more people, I would hear stories that sometimes came across as normalized. And as I'm listening to it, I'm like, is this person aware that this is not how it's supposed to be? That this was not supposed to happen to them? And I started realizing that our understanding of sexual violation, rape, and assault wasn't always what it is today. And I think that's one of the things that you all have, is that you have this benefit of having language and these new tools to kind of understand it that we didn't have, not even 15 years ago, kind of when I was where you were. And so it wasn't until I got older that I could contextualize and realize this is like damn near epidemic in the sense that we normalize this. So I wanted to do something as a survivor, as somebody who didn't want to see other people having to go through this, or if they did, that they weren't alone, that they had people that they could talk to, that they had someone who could understand. And so that's kind of how I got into this. But in order for me to do that, I felt like I had to be equipped, I had to be knowledgeable. And so I decided to kind of go into understanding women's studies, gender studies, feminism. And I came into my feminism, I like to tell people, I came into my feminism through hip-hop music. How many of you are familiar with hip-hop music? Yeah, I know it's kind of pale out here, but I mean, I know y'all listen to something. Drake don't count. Drake don't count. But for me, and I'm dating myself now, but my first introduction to feminism was through artists like Salt and Peppa and Queen Latifah and MC Lyte, and women who kind of came into this male-dominated genre, which was a genre of music that came out of a culture that was about liberation, right? It was about freedom fighting, and yet it was still male-dominated, right? But here were these women that kind of came in and said, well, we're here too, we're experiencing these things too, and we have a voice as well. But not just to talk about it as an act of like rebellion and revolution, but kind of like, we just love the music, we love the culture, this is who we are, and we want to take part of that. And so I'm getting these messages as I'm coming up as a young adult, a teenager, and things like that. It's like, yeah, it's my thing, and I shake it the way that I feel it, with a little seduction and some sex appeal. I'm like 13 years old, like, yeah, what the hell do I know about sex appeal and seduction at 13? But what I did know was that these were some women from Queens, which is where I was born, talking about how they can do whatever they want to do with their own bodies. And that was not a mainstream message, okay? So that was important to me. And that taught me that there was something different about being, at least for me, a black girl and a black woman. There was something different. So that's how I came into it. But when I was in college, it was when I began to study theory. And I learned the names like Florence Kennedy and Gloria Steinem and, Bell Hooks, who I got to meet and eat with, and just these different people who had contributed to this work. And I was like, I want to do that, but I want to make it more accessible. And so one of the things that I'd like to tell people whenever we are kind of doing any of the so-called work that we talk about, we have to make it accessible to as many people as possible. And I think that's something that we kind of lose sight of, and I've noticed as I've gone to college campuses, is that a lot of the words you use, people on the street don't understand what you're talking about. They don't. And if you're trying to get a message out, you have to meet people where they are. And so I decided that was going to be what I was going to do. I was going to meet people where they are. And if it was to talk about feminism, knowing that people hated feminism, oh my gosh, the ways in which people hate feminism, I was like, nah, I got to give a different message. And so I started getting into sex-positive feminism. Who knows what sex-positive feminism is? Yeah? Raise your hands if you know. Who knows what sex-positive? Let me see. Okay, maybe 10% of you, 15% of you know what sex-positive feminism is. Anybody want to take a shot and educate your peers? No. All right. Do you like sex? Yeah, well, let's talk about it positively. So we got that. That's positive. It's basically the idea that we should approach sex not from a deficit or a negative point of view, but from something that can be very beautiful and positive and enjoyable and pleasurable, and that we have a right to enjoy it on our own terms in the way that we see fit if we are adults and we are able to consent and make those decisions, that it can be empowering for us to claim this kind of agency and autonomy over our own bodies and engage in pleasure and sexual activity on our own terms. Does that make sense? All right. So like when you're teaching your kids about sex, it's not, don't you have sex and, until you're married. It's, let's talk about what it means to be ready to engage in sex. And here's some of the ways you may know that you're ready for sex. It's teaching young people that, sex is not going to send you to hell. Ooh, I know I'm in a Jesuit school. So sex is not going to send you to hell. I heard they don't give out condoms here. Give me a moment. Give me a moment. I hope there's an STD clinic nearby you can get tested, because my God, how do you know? I know y'all fucking, so I mean, if they're not giving you condoms, you gotta travel far to get them. But sex positivity is talking about how condoms can be a really great part of having sex, right? Make it last a little longer. I heard, when I left the convent, they told me that. So I decided that, because I was hot in the ass. I was like, yes, porn, yes, vibrator at 14, yes, I love how that feels, but maybe I should learn a little bit more about it. And getting into sex-positive feminism, one of the things I learned was how white it was. So it made me realize that it was white women who had the right to be sexually open and out and explicit and have agency. And what about the rest of us? Where do we fit into this? And all of the top names and the prominent figures, sex workers, and even to this day, the sex workers that tend to get the most attention and are the go-to people are white. And I had an issue with that. But I had to examine why this was an issue. So I had to examine, Black people and our connection to sex and sexuality. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But I also recognized that was also because the mainstreaming of feminism was really white. It was very much, white women have the right to do this, and we're going to fight for this, and when it happens for us, it's going to trickle down to everybody else. When the truth is, women of color had feminism in their cultures centuries, right? What Gloria said, I always thought feminism was created by Black women. That's what she said, because that was her understanding of it. They just put out a thing that said, feminism in African cultures, for a couple of hundred years or so. I'm like, we knew that. So it's like, how do I make sure that people understand that we are at the foundation of feminist thought and feminist practice, even though we weren't necessarily allowed in the academy to be able to write about it and document things, that we were living this practice. And how do I get it so that Black folks, particularly Black women, are represented in this sex-positive movement? Because the importance of the reclamation of the body for Black people is super important when you consider the legacy of enslavement, right? So what is it like for centuries to be a people who are not entitled to say, this is my body, when your body belongs to somebody else? So if a cornerstone of, healthy sexuality is the first acknowledging that it's your body and it's the right to do that, how does a people who have been enslaved for centuries get to a place where they're able to comfortably do that? And I realized that there wasn't a whole lot of conversation about that. So I started looking into the academy. What are Black people saying about sexuality? Was coming up dry. If anything, what I was finding was commentary on why Black academics don't talk about sex and sexuality as much. Still taboo, still scary to talk about, still confronting trauma that they don't necessarily realize exists. Centuries of internalized trauma passed along. How we're socializing our children is rooted in this trauma of my body did not belong to me. There's something wrong and gross about it. I'm disconnected from it, right? So I started really thinking, like, how can I work in this? How can I be this one person that could do something about that? So I was like, I'm going to be a sex-positive feminist. Let me start a blog. Isn't that what you do when you want people to hear you? You start a blog. I was like, ain't nobody going to listen to me. Because I'm just this fat Black chick talking about fucking. Who's going to listen to me? But I'm going to give them some feminism, too. They're going to read about the sex. They're going to come for the sex. They're going to stay for the feminism. I'm going to change the world. There's also the religious taboo, right? So I grew up in the church. I was going to church, Friday youth service, Sunday morning, stay later for Sunday afternoon, Bible school. In the summer, they call vacation Bible school. Oh, shit. The things that you did in vacation Bible school. I don't understand how that's not a porn category, because listen, y'all should know. So, but I was that kid. I was singing in choirs. I was all about thank you, Jesus. And I was wondering why people had this idea that we shouldn't be having sex until we're married. I was like, Black folks aren't allowed to get married. What are y'all talking about? Are you mean to tell me all these hundreds of years that all these people were sinners because the state wouldn't allow us to get married, but we were having sex and having children? What does that make us? It didn't reconcile for me. It didn't reconcile for me when I'm living in a state that is oppressing me by not even allowing me to live out my Christian duty. Right? Have we thought about that? The denial of Christian duty that has been inflicted upon black people in this country? So I was like, nah, forget that. I'm tired. Nope. Y'all ain't gonna tell me I can't fuck. So the other thing I was thinking about, totally flip on that, is the disproportionate rates of sexual violence within our community. Why is that happening? And I started thinking about, again, this connection to there's this disconnect between body and pleasure and ownership of body and control of body. Like, do we even have control of ourselves? And I was like, why is it that I was 4 and I experienced this thing? And why do so many black women and black men that I know have experienced sexual violence before they turn 18? Why is that? And why does it seem to be more than other people? What's going on with us? Is this all part of, again, this enslavement and this trauma? And why are we not talking about this? This is super important. And so I was compelled to get involved in that. But how do we get black people to talk about sex positivity, sexual violence, domestic violence, any of these things, if we won't even acknowledge that it's okay for us to enjoy our bodies and ourselves? So I'm kind of thinking about that. And in order to do that, I had to confront the whiteness of all of it. I had to kind of look at whiteness and kind of understand the role that whiteness was playing in this oppression of black sexuality. And it is oppressive as hell, still. And it's a struggle when you try to have conversations. For example, we talk a lot about trafficking, right? Human trafficking, particularly in this country. They have sex workers who say, listen, a lot of this stuff that they're saying about sex trafficking is blown out of proportion because they're trying to attack sex workers and things like that. And I say, I respect that. But I also know that in this country, 40% of the minors that are trafficked for domestic and sexual labor are black children. Now, if black people only make up 13% of the population, that's adults too, why is it 40% of minors that are being trafficked are black? So while I understand that you, white sex worker, are advocating for your rights, and I believe you have the rights, I cannot allow you to dismiss the very real reality, okay, that children are being snatched up off the streets, as we just saw in D.C. these last couple weeks. How many of you noticed that in Washington, D.C., something like 10 girls were snatched up in like 72 hours? And one of them was returned, and the mother said, I think my daughter was being trafficked. And so we're in a country where there's statistically over 64,000 missing black girls and women right now, unaccounted for. Where are they? Possibly being trafficked. So that tension with the sex positivity movement is like, yes, sex positive white sex worker, I want to support what you're doing. And I'm totally for that, but we also have to talk. I need you to talk about what's happening to black children and black women and black girls and black boys in this same kind of space. So that's what it means to be a black person in the sex positive movement. It's also about, I need you to talk about sexual violence in the black community without being racist about it. Without you being like, yeah, those black men, of course they're doing that. How do I have that nuanced conversation with you when you're trying to work with me on sex positivity and trying to support people, but you can't get it out your head that black men are inherently violent? And that's why they're doing this. Or that black women are whores, naturally Jezebel whores. You can't get past that. So you don't even believe that we have that. That's the kind of stuff that I've had to confront. I'm just giving you a history of kind of like what my work has been and how I've gotten to that, okay? So that creates a tough connection for me as a black woman and a feminist. It's like, yeah, we've got the woman thing, the gender thing here, but we have to confront this race elephant in the room. And the elephant is always there. It is always there. Okay? Listen, white women, don't get offended. But y'all are, by virtue of your existence, some of the most violent people for black folks. And it's not even your fault. It is the devaluing of white womanhood that requires protection and preservation that makes other people suffer. If you were not seen as delicate flowers and capable of taking care of yourselves, you would not have all of these laws built and designed to oppress people of color, particularly men of color, to protect you. Starting with the weed laws, right? Weed restriction was about stopping black and Mexican men from raping white women, right? In California, I mean, you're in Colorado, you can get high now, but let's not forget that that was a huge motivation for that. Emmett Till, what happened to him? We don't know. They said he whistled at a white woman and was killed, okay? How many times has that happened? And when do white women come forward and say, listen, we don't want that label. We don't want to be oppressive in that. And those conversations need to happen within the feminist movement. When white women come to us and say, well, we're all women. Hold on. It's a very new thing for a black woman to actually be considered a woman. Because womanhood, by default, is what color? White. Because all the rest of us are hyphenated women, right? African-American woman, Asian American woman, Latino woman. The only people using white women are non-white women. Because the understanding is that woman is this prototypical kind of white woman. That's violence. Understand that. Understand what violence looks like. It's that erasure. So I've had to confront those things in order to even get to these conversations about healthy sexuality, sexual violence prevention, all of that stuff. It's complicated. And so many of you are out here kind of doing this work and you're addressing issues of like sexual violence on your campus and how we can go about, talking about consent and things in these kinds of ways. But you're not getting into these nuanced conversations. You're not picking these things apart. And maybe it's because you haven't had to confront that because you grow up in these homogenous societies. You don't have somebody staring you in the face requiring and demanding that you include them too. And that you consider who they are. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to knock on your door and be like, hey, big black woman right here. Gotta have this conversation. I don't like this women's march nonsense. I know what you did. You put 3 women of color up in there, but I know where it's coming from. Okay? I spoke at the Philly one. The only reason why I spoke at the Philly one is because I had to cuss out the organizers for not having representation of women of color, trans women, queer women, until the last minute. Because by default, it was just going to be about them, right? That's how you have those things happen. Okay. What is feminism? Somebody smart here. Somebody who's about to graduate. What is feminism? Anybody? I'll pick on somebody. I'm Socratic, yes?
Okay, well, a lot of people describe it as the radical notion that men and women are equal, but it's really deeper than that. It's also men, women, and gender non-conforming people, whether they be cisgender or transgender. It's not necessarily about equality, because my black ass does not want to replicate what white men and women have done.
Her black ass does not want to replicate what white people have done to her. Yes! Come on, you want to stand up here with me? Come give this talk. No, she's like, I'm good, okay. Keep going. No, keep going. I'm listening.
I feel like feminism should really be, it's just like noticing how the Western gender binary has failed us, how that Western gender binary is super racist.
Yes.
And how we really need to center women's liberation around like eco-feminism, also anti-racist feminism, and then learning about like trans feminism as well.
Yes.
So I think it's just like an all-encompassing movement that's for the liberation of women and also in turn everyone else. That's what I feel.
Wow. That was fantastic. Like, seriously, that needs to go on Wikipedia. What's your name, sis? What's your name?
My name's Trish.
Trish, okay. Well, she really, broke that down. That's so real. And, one of the things I like to ask people is, how many types of feminism can you name? You named ecofeminism. You said transfeminism. I thought you said another one. Yes, anti-racist. But there's so many types of feminism, right? What is ecofeminism? Maintains that men are responsible for destruction of our ecological systems and that femininity is the true healer and savior of the earth. Do you believe that? How do you believe about it? You believe that? Who starts all the damn wars? Who charges people to drink water? Oh, see? Who's the CEOs charging people to drink water? Bam! See, y'all are with me. They're teaching you some things here. What is post-structural feminism? It's the idea that equality is defined by men and equating feminism only with the fight that denies women options. Difference is power. Kind of what you're saying. Like, it's understanding that it's not necessarily we're trying to get equality, right? Why are we going to be equal to lower people? It's not even Misandry Monday. But it's this idea that there's power in our difference. So it's even going beyond the gender binary and recognizing that with other, identities, there's power there, right? There's power in our collective difference. A collective difference is a great phrase. Use it. You have New Age feminism, which embraces the femme, right? And the feminine and rejects the idea that it's just for the male gaze. And that is gaining in popularity. And I do a lot of talk about, feminism and aesthetics and beauty and things like that, because there was, for this long time, this idea that if you cared about wearing makeup and how your hair looked, you weren't a real feminist because you're just doing this for the male gaze. And that's been a lot of people's critique about Beyonce. It's like, well, she, how feminist is she because, she gyrates and does all this stuff for male gaze. For all you know, she just likes to gyrate. It's what she wants to do. Who are you to determine what is for the male gaze and what is not? Right? So there's this idea that it's okay to be femme. Right? Postmodern, sex and gender are socially constructed. Who believes that? Okay, some people don't. It's the idea that gender is performative. How many people believe that? Right? And that there's no single reason for a woman's subjugation if that is true. Right? So it's almost like you're creating subjugation. Why? Because it's not really real. Right? It's tricky when you apply that to race. Right? Because you're kind of telling people race is a social construct that's not real, but oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Okay. You've got groups like the Women of All Red Nations, the Combahee River Collective. You've got the Comisión Femenina Mexicana Nacional. You've got all of these feminist groups, these foundations, these organizations that were started because feminism, big F, was ignoring and erasing a lot of the issues that women of color were dealing with. Queer women were dealing with, trans women were dealing with, disabled women were dealing with, women from other countries outside of the Western thing. All these things came about because of that. And it's important to recognize those things and acknowledge them for what they are. Because, again, difference is power. But what we have right now is we have a lot of young people that are accessing feminism through these very, very narrow views. Okay? And one of them is through Black feminist voices like myself online. Now, I'm going to read you a little excerpt that was a study on Black feminists on Twitter, believe it or not, and how our words are spread. As Amanda Lineberry in 2014, she says, Twitter has created a unique platform for Black feminists to express themselves freely as individuals, but also connect that dialogue to other Black feminists through hashtags like Solidarity is for White Women and Black Power is for Black Men. The individual text that these women tweeted would not be influential without the connective tissue that the hashtags can provide. These tweets are powerful in their aggregate as comprehensive lists of microaggressions against Black women, collections of discriminatory practices, and public conversations between important figures promoting Black feminism. And I use Black feminism as an example of what's happening in social media, because we made it what it is, right? We can apply this across the board. We can apply this to pro-Muslim work that is being done, like empowering Muslim individuals. We can apply this to trans people. We can apply this to the disabled activists. We can apply this to so many people. The same idea that we can use kind of hashtags and create this connective tissue to bring life to these social issues and have these voices being heard that were not heard before. And so we also see that in the sexual violence sector. It's been a lot of activity on social media related to sexual violence prevention. And a lot of these things, we're learning about the stuff that's happening that we would have never known before. Why? What do your universities do? You were talking about it earlier at dinner. Cover it up. It is not a good look for a university to have to admit that there are students raping other students, that there are faculty raping students, that there are students raping faculty. It's not a good look for them to admit to that. So they've been able to cover it up. But now social media is like, no, we're going to talk about it. We're going to get it out there. We're going to use the tools that we have. We're going to create these spaces for these very necessary conversations. We're going to expose what's happening. And as a result, what have we seen recently? We've seen an increase in reporting to the police. Used to be there was only like 24% of assaults were reported. Now it's at 35%, is an estimated. That's a big deal. Even knowing that police are backlogging rape kits, they're not even documenting when people report, but still, 35%, we're moving in the right direction. A lot of that is because your voices are coming out. You're saying these things, you're getting it out there. You're finding community with other people, right? Social media helps us connect with people in other countries. So that's how you learn this shit is epidemic, right? Because you think that it's only happening here, but then when you read the same exact stories from people all around the world, what does that tell you about human beings? They ain't shit. If I can have a story about street harassment and have 100 women on 5 continents within 20 minutes tell me a similar story, what does that say? That this is not just some occasional thing. This is a norm. This is a norm. How have we gotten to a place where sexual violence and harassment is the norm? Because we are not talking about it in the ways that are really going to bring about change. We're scared to have these conversations. We're scared to confront our best friends that are doing this stuff. We're scared to confront our fathers, our mothers who did these things to us. We're scared to just invite that uncle we all know has done horrible things to people in our family, yet we keep inviting him to come over for Thanksgiving and serving his ass a plate. We keep listening to the music of the people who do these things, keep supporting them, making excuses for them. And when we find that they have drugged over 40 different women, we say, but they gave us a great TV show. So that's when you realize that this is normal and you have a different challenge. How do you, as somebody who cares about preventing sexual violence against people, stand up to a larger society that is kind of like, it happens. Men will be men, boys will be boys. Women want it, girls asking for it. She was 5, she was flirting with me. I've read cases where they have said 10-year-old girls are flirting with them, where the judge said an 11-year-old girl was provocative. That's where we live. Buzzwords, intersectionality. What does it mean? No.
It's the idea that a person that can be oppressed or a person has multiple identities and it changes the way that they interact with the world and the way that the world interacts with them.
That's what you want it to believe it is. What is intersectionality? You're close. Yes?
How all different power structures and systems of oppression are interconnected and reliant on each other. And when you confront things one system of oppression, you have to confront all.
That's close. Intersectionality is about black women. Period. Full stop. It's not funny. I'm dead ass. I'm tired of people acting like it applies to other people without acknowledging for whom it was born. It is, hey, I didn't come up with it. I'm just representing the people that did. Kimberly Crenshaw is still alive. Go ask her. What is intersectionality? Please tell me that you know that she is the one who created this, right? But before her, there was a Florence Kennedy. Who knows who Florence Kennedy is? Florence Kennedy is one of the greatest feminist women to ever walk the face of this earth. She did not give a single goddamn about anybody or anything. She wore her cowboy hats. She sat in front of you and told you that you were an oppressive piece of shit. And she made sure that Shirley Chisholm was nominated for president by creating the Feminist Party. This is 101 stuff. You got to know this. Okay? So when I say stop getting your hot takes from these 140 characters and educate yourself about feminism so that you can speak intelligently and do this work with information, that's what I'm talking about. You got to know who Florence Kennedy is. You got to know that's who Gloria Steinem looks up to. Okay? You got to understand that Kimberly Crenshaw took on a company that was not trying to recognize that black women were uniquely oppressed. Because they said, well, black people have these things, and then the women have these things, so you should be fine. And they're like, no, we're not. So the idea was born out of the intersection of race and gender. And that is the foundation of it. But what we're seeing now, it's really fascinating to me, is I'll see a gay, cisgendered white man talk about intersectionality. I'm like, if you don't sit your ass down, and I'm being very real, okay? Because you can talk about what you're dealing with, but that intersectionality, capital I, ain't got nothing to do with you, okay? And it's another way that black women are erased from this stuff, okay? Kimberly Crenshaw, Florence Kennedy. Take out your phones and Google them, bookmark it, read it for later. I've learned that when I say these kinds of things, people are like, huh? And I realize that it's about meeting you where you are. So clearly you don't know who Florence Kennedy is. I'm encouraging you to teach her. So how do I talk to you about the Feminist Party and about what happened to Shirley Chisholm and how black men did not support her and how Julian Bond was absolutely against her running for president? How do I explain to you that the reason she did not get further was not because of white people, it was because of men, black men. She said it herself. It wasn't so much that she was black, it was that she was a woman. Imagine what would have happened if she had the support of black men, officially. How far she may have gone. And yet now, these are the same people that trump her name to use it against Hillary, right? Because Hillary's this oppressor, right? So remember Shirley Chisholm. You motherfuckers forgot Shirley Chisholm. You ignored her. You oppressed her. You are the ones that did that. So to be a black woman means you have to confront both of these things. That there's this racism, but then there's also this sexism. So I got to meet people where they are. And I realize that the best way to engage these people in these conversations is to talk about sex. Some people didn't like that. Matter of fact, some of the people watching on this Periscope used to talk a lot of shit about me because of how I was very overt in my conversations about sex and sexuality. I knew that was the hook. And I had to meet people where they were. If I wanted to talk to a man about consent and getting him to understand why consent is sexy, I had to present in a certain way. I hate that, but it had to be done, and it worked. Because now people are listening, and they're like, wow, she's talking about sex, that's great, but oh, there's a message there. Maybe I should ask this woman if she wants to have sex with me first. You see? And that's kind of like the work that I've been doing. And some people may take issue with that, but if it means one less person is being assaulted, then that's what I'm going to do. So I got into talking about kink. Who knows about kink? Oh, I see a hand. I see another hand over there. You can raise it higher. It's okay. BDSM? Yeah? Y'all know what that is? If I say 50 Shades and y'all say yes, I'm going to slap all of you. Because that is not BDSM. That is trash. Trash. So I found myself delving more into kink as therapy, as healing for me, as a survivor. And I started talking more about it because, again, this is another space that was so white. But I knew that people of color were engaging in BDSM. I knew this, but why were we not represented in the literature, the movies, and the imagery or anything? We do this too. And so I wrote a book. I don't know if any of you read it. You could. It's still on sale. Called Push the Button, and it's sexy. But it also talks about domestic violence. It talks about healing through kink, through BDSM. And I found that that was a pathway to begin these conversations. Why? Because people were interested in whips and chains. They wanted to know more about it. But when they came for that, then I got to talk about consent, enthusiastic consent, safe sex. What is violation versus what is not? What the risks are versus, understanding what you're getting involved in. So they wanted the fun story, but I gave them the information. So many of you that are looking to kind of get into this work, you can take a pamphlet and smack somebody on the head with it, but it's not going to register with them in the same way as you make it applicable to their lives. And that means having conversations with people. When they come to your tables that are set up, have a conversation with somebody. Get to know a little bit about them before you beat them over the head with statistics. You can tell them all statistics in the world. Those things don't matter. They're not going to resonate. Because you've got to find a way to have that common language. And think about that when you leave school. People don't know what cis heteronormativity is. They don't know what heteropatriarchy is. They don't know these words that you're so familiar with. When you say performative masculinity, they're like, what the hell are you talking about? You got to recognize kind of that insular privilege that you have. And so when you go outside, you got to be able to talk to people about that. How do you have these conversations? I wrote an article for Ebony Magazine about enthusiastic consent, and I said, we do more to teach people how to avoid being raped, and not enough to teach people not to rape in the first place. A big part of the problem is that we don't discuss the importance of proactively and clearly consenting to sex. And I've thought a bit about what it means to not simply consent to sex, but to do so enthusiastically, leaving no room for confusion for all parties involved. And this made me think a little bit more about why consent doesn't come up. Because we set sex up to be a thing that is taken from women. It is to be taken, or she gives it, as though it's this object. Not that she's engaged with. It's an offering of sorts. But if she offers it up, then what? Who said it? She said she's a hoe, right? Somebody said whore, same word. English, black English, same thing. She gives it up, then she's that whore. So what does that do to the men? What did Tupac say? I don't want it if it's that easy. So we created this culture of, you have to coerce a woman. If she gives it up too much, she's one of them dirty girls. A good girl will make you work for it. A valuable girl, the kind of woman that you would marry, won't give it up too easy. She'll make you work for it. You might have to convince her to do it. It's another word for convincing her to do it. Coercion. How do we think of coercion now? We weren't thinking about it like that 15 years ago. Okay? I want to kind of start to wrap it up. I want to talk about an example that came up. Birth of a Nation. Who heard of that movie? Right? You heard of the controversy around Birth of a Nation, right? What was the controversy? Nate Parker was accused of raping a woman, right? Back in 1999, while he was a student at Penn State. Okay. People were like, well, why is this coming out now? They're trying to bring a black man down while he's trying to bring out this story of Nat Turner. Okay, Nat Turner's story has been around for a very long time. All you got to do is go read it. There's books about it, right? We didn't need the movie to tell us about Nat Turner. We needed to have a conversation about consent, intoxication, these larger things that I think we could have had really great conversations about had we not made it so simple about just trying to keep a black man down. And I was one of the people who was blamed for the movie tanking. Me, just me, little girl from the Bronx. They told me that I was responsible for it tanking. Never mind that Fox came to me to help promote it. Never mind I designed an entire campaign to support the movie and to promote the movie. Forget all of that. No, I single-handedly brought it down. Because I dared say I would not support this man who would not acknowledge and hold himself accountable for this thing he did 15 years ago. And the empathy that I had was like, I remember being in college in those years. We did not have this language, and we were not talking about it in this way. Starting to. But I truly came to believe, I was like, I don't think he did anything wrong. And I can see how. Because back then, when that happened to me, I thought it was my fault. I didn't have language telling me that it wasn't. I went to the party, I drank, I put myself in a situation, that's what happened. Now we know different, right? So what does that mean? You got to meet people where they are. There's still a lot of people who think like him. Well, what do you mean that was wrong? We got to stop like kind of beating people over the head and being like, listen, I got to kind of understand that maybe they didn't quite get it, and how do we make sure that people are getting the same education that we are? How are we making it accessible? Because really, it's not about proving a point or being right. It's about fewer people being harmed. So how do we do that, right? Kind of confront that. You have to speak up, right? A lot of talk about bystander intervention. What does that look like in this context? So many of us know a rapist of any gender, any sexual orientation, identity. We know somebody, just statistically, we know somebody who has raped. How do we deal with that? How do we confront that? When we hear the jokes, do you stop them or do you laugh along with it? When you hear them making comments about people in certain ways that rub you wrong, do you stop them in that moment or do you let it go? What is your responsibility when you see something happening? Do you step in or do you just kind of mind your business? And I created this like campaign that was, designed to combat street harassment by being a bystander, by being a bystander who intervenes in very safe ways. And this has been replicated a number of times in a number of different ways. And it's called You OK Sis. And one of the things I realized is that we are so content to mind our own business. And that's how these things, how they keep happening and they keep growing. Because we are not willing to stand up or to speak up and say, no, this is wrong. Or to say, I'm going to help this person. We just mind our own business. And so I'm thinking about all of you. You're getting this education. You're kind of insulated in this school. You've got a lot of privilege. You've got a lot of access to resources. You're learning all these kinds of things. But then when you leave here, you are going to go into the real world, and you're going to confront a lot of things that are happening. What are you going to do? How are you going to challenge yourself to be a champion for people who have been victimized? And by victimized, I mean perpetrators as well. They are victimized as well because they're engaging in something that is completely horrible and it's harming them. They've got to live with that. How are we confronting the power structures that are complicit in this? Rape culture. They say rape culture is not real. Yes, it is. It is called culture. We can call it rape culture, but nah, we don't need, that's like adding man whore or, something like, no, it is our culture. It is a culture that condones sexual violation as the normal way of going about sexual engagement. And so you can take the feminist lens, you can take the sex positive approach, you can take whatever approach you need to be, intersectional, whatever. You can educate yourself, confront your own biases, whatever it is that you need to do, but you need to do something. Don't just take your degree and run. Okay, I'm very serious. Don't take your degree and run. Remember that each and every one of you has the power to stop something horrible from happening. Just by speaking up, just by being present, just by checking somebody, just by confronting somebody, just by making it known that you won't tolerate that around you. Are you creating a welcoming space for violent people? Or are you making it very clear this is not going to happen here, right? When somebody reports sexual assault, support them. Believe people. So-called false rape reporting is what, 3 to 5%, maybe? It's not big. It's real. Like, this is really what's happening. Believe people. Believe the victims. Believe the survivors. Let them tell their stories. Support them when they tell their stories. And do what you can to make sure that, we're working to end this. I'm older. I'm passing this on to you because I'm getting tired. Me and my peers, we're fading because we've been doing this for so long. We're looking at you to be the ones to keep this going. All right? I know it got a little bit dark, but it's so important, particularly because of where we are with this Trump administration. They're going to strip all the funding for all the programs that could be doing this work, so it becomes an individual thing. We have even greater responsibility now to get the education out, to get the support out, to get the work out. All right? Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you for being super attentive.